Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about contemporary Kabbalah and also Kabbalah as a process. And so far on my channel I have talked about Hermetic Kabbalah, which is the Kabbalah of the Golden Dawn, and I've already got quite a number of videos on my channel about Hermetic Kabbalah, and especially in regard to tarot. But what I want to do today is talk further about Kabbalah, and I want to talk about Kabbalah more in its own right, and I want to talk about Kabbalah as process. And the reason why I want to talk about that is because I want to talk about Kabbalah as a process as well as a spiritual practice, and I want to talk about Kabbalah on a different level to what is normally seen or discussed. So I regard this type of Kabbalah as contemporary Kabbalah. That's my term for this. And this type of Kabbalah is really a branching out of Hermetic Kabbalah. And I'm going to recommend some books as resources as well. And I think this type of Kabbalah is not only a contemporary view, but it's really helpful for people who want to learn more about Kabbalah, not necessarily in regard to tarot. So I've got a diagram of the Kabbalah behind me, and for people who are more familiar with Kabbalah or know something about Hermetic Kabbalah, this is a diagram of the Hermetic form of Kabbalah. And Hermetic Kabbalah is really Jewish Kabbalah that was changed, or a framework being used by the Golden Dawn with their own tarot correspondences. And that is why it became Hermetic Kabbalah, and it was based on the framework of the original Jewish Kabbalah. So this is what Hermetic Kabbalah looks like and what it basically is. And as I was saying, I've got a lot of videos about Hermetic Kabbalah in regard to tarot on my channel for people who want to have a look at that playlist. And I've got a visual here of a magician using the Kabbalah framework. And this was really the reason for Hermetic Kabbalah that was created by the Golden Dawn, and upon which their tarot decks were based on. It was used for magic and ritual, and it was also used for spiritual development. So a more contemporary view of Kabbalah is seeing Kabbalah more from a cosmology point of view, and the view of the universe, which is a bit like quantum physics. And this visual here of Kabbalah is more like a framework or structure of atoms. And that is how I really see Kabbalah. I see it more from a contemporary point of view. So if you think of Kabbalah in this way, it really gives you a different approach. If you think of Kabbalah as a framework for the atoms and cosmos and the life of the universe, the interaction of atoms to create life and universal life, not only life on earth but universal life. And here is a black and white view of that same structure, that same idea. It also gives Kabbalah more of a three-dimensional or even a multi-dimensional approach and framework rather than a two-dimensional flat kind of framework that some people may think of with Kabbalah. And if I also show you this diagram too, this is a Kabbalah diagram without the strong emphasis on the three pillars that you normally see. There's lots of different ways of approaching Kabbalah and looking at Kabbalah rather than the original Jewish Kabbalah or the later Christian Kabbalah or even the Hermetic Kabbalah. If you look at Kabbalah in a more contemporary way and almost from a quantum physics point of view, Kabbalah represents to me process rather than a fixed, rigid thing. I see Kabbalah as process and the process of everything in life and everything in the universe. So now I want to talk about some books, some really good resources for people who want to look into this a bit more. The first book is The Complete Guide to the Kabbalah by Will Parfitt. This book is one of the best primer books around. It's got a bit of everything. It's a great introduction in the beginning of the book, the first few chapters. It takes you through the usual or the original Jewish Kabbalah structure, but it also has a chapter on tarot correspondences in here as well. And in the back of the book it has one of the most detailed table of correspondences I've ever seen, and I think a lot of the correspondences were taken from the Book of Thoth, originally written by Samuel Mathers and then expanded by Aleister Crowley. And what I also love about this book is that it also takes Kabbalah up to modern and contemporary times and approaches, and it even has information on how to apply this in practical ways in everyday life. It really is a great book, and you can get this on Amazon secondhand. I'm not sure if it's on Kindle, but you can definitely get this. I think it would be still in print. I'm sure it's in print. It's becoming a modern or contemporary classic. Will Parfitt is a Kabbalah expert, someone who has studied Kabbalah for many years from different perspectives. So I'm really recommending this book. If this was the only book that you got on Kabbalah from different perspectives, this is the best book to get. The Complete Guide to Kabbalah by Will Parfitt. and the subtitle is How to Apply the Ancient Mysteries of the Kabbalah to Your Everyday Life. And that's quite an accessible book. Now, the next one is very much contemporary Kabbalah, and this has been quite an influence on me. This book is written by Pamela Eakins, who created Tarot of the Spirit deck and the Tarot of the Spirit book. And I have got a video on my channel reviewing the Tarot of the Spirit deck. It's one of my favourite contemporary Kabbalah decks, and I also have the details there for the Tarot of the Spirit book. But that Tarot of the Spirit book is about Hermetic Kabbalah, because that is in regard to tarot. But this is a later book by Pamela Eakins, when she started to create and devise her own contemporary Kabbalah based on a cosmology perspective. This is a fascinating book. This is called The Lightning Papers by Pamela Eakins. The subtitle is 10 Powers of Evolution. And it's all about using the 10 spheres of the Kabbalah, the 10 Sephirah, to use these 10 Sephirah as a practice for personal evolution, for personal development, self-development, spiritual development. It's a really original approach. It's one of the few books around that has such a contemporary quantum approach to tarot. And this book is quite accessible in the way that it is written almost in a story form. There are 10 chapters, one for each of the Sephirah, and there is part of each chapter is instructional, but the other half of each chapter is kind of anecdotes from courses that Pamela Eakins runs, because Pamela Eakins has her own mystery school. And it's a great way of understanding Kabbalah from a contemporary point of view, because you are reading about individual students' own understanding of the concepts of contemporary Kabbalah. So I'm recommending this book for people who want to particularly learn more about Kabbalah from a contemporary cosmology perspective. This book is quite easy to get. It's only been published in recent years. The Lightning Papers by Pamela Eakins, PhD. 10 Powers of Evolution. And there's a recommendation quote on the top of the cover saying, "The rarest of books, a vision of the universe, a stream of energy, a cosmological awakening." And that quote comes from Brian Swim, PhD, who's very well regarded as a cosmology expert. And the idea of the Lightning Papers for the title of the book comes from what is called the lightning flash from the first Sephirah all the way down to the 10th. So you can see this zigzag line, which is known as the lightning flash. And I've commented on one of my Kabbalah videos before that it's very interesting that the beginning of life on planet Earth was most likely started by a lightning flash. So that is very, very interesting to think about. Now the next book, also written by Pamela Eakins, and it's like a companion book to the Lightning Papers, and I really like this book too. Visionary Cosmology, The New Paradigm by Pamela Eakins, and this book is not as thick as the Lightning Papers. The Lightning Papers is quite thick. This book is really a summary of the Lightning Papers for people who don't want something quite as detailed, or they don't want the student anecdotes. If you just want a summary of the contemporary Kabbalah from a cosmology perspective, if you want a summary rather than being overwhelmed by too much detail at first. I'm not saying that that book is too much detail, but it would take a while, quite a bit of time to read. And maybe this book would be a better introduction to start with this book first before you started branching out into further detail. Maybe you want to actually, you might like to go this way first and get a kind of summary or overview of this cosmology, contemporary Kabbalah first. So this is Visionary Cosmology, The New Paradigm by Pamela Eakins. And the last book, a little bit different but still about Kabbalah, God is a Verb by Rabbi David A. Cooper. Kabbalah and the Practice of Mystical Judaism. Now I wanted to mention this book because this book is more about Kabbalah as a spiritual practice. It is what you would probably call contemporary Jewish Kabbalah, that's based on the original concepts of Jewish Kabbalah. But for people who might be more interested in Kabbalah from a spiritual and mystical perspective and want to follow Kabbalah or use Kabbalah as a spiritual practice, this is the best book around for that. It has all kinds of ideas and explanations about Kabbalah as a spiritual practice, and it's very good at explaining the mystical Kabbalah Jewish concepts. It's a really, really good book for that. So I wanted to include this book because it's actually seen as a bit of a radical or different Kabbalah book, even from a contemporary Jewish Kabbalah perspective, because of the title, God is a Verb. In other words, this is talking about Kabbalah as process rather than a thing. The original Jewish Kabbalah was more about Kabbalah as a representation of the creation of the world, but it was also a kind of definition of God, and God as a thing or God as a noun, which is how God is usually seen or thought of. And I don't normally use the G word. That I actually think of Kabbalah as source, as a universal source and a framework to describe and work with the universal source. That's how I see the universal power or energy, however you want to refer to that. I actually don't use the G word, but I really like this book because it's one of the few around that is describing Kabbalah itself as process, and that is how I see Kabbalah as well. So this is God is a Verb by David A. Cooper, Rabbi David A. Cooper. And I'll put the details below the video for all 4 books, and I hope people are going to look into some of these books, and some of them, I'm sure all of these books would still be available, and they may be available on Kindle, and you may even be able to get some of these books possibly secondhand as well on Amazon. So I hope you enjoyed learning about contemporary Kabbalah. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.